While the cities have been the epicentre of COVID outbreaks, this certainly hasn't spared the bush from the impact of the pandemic, far from it. And farmers still desperate to bring in more labour, local, international, doesn't matter, they just need the hands. However, state and federal border restrictions have led to a major shortfall. Now, there are now concerns that unless the states submit plans to ease quarantine restrictions, and without some easing of restrictions on incoming farm workers, fruit and vegetable prices could rise by 15 to 25% next year. Now, that hits all of us when we go to the shops. Joining me now to discuss is the Agriculture Minister, David Littleproud. David, nice to catch up with you again.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I know we spoke about this on radio about 4 months ago. Still, the problem persists. We still don't have the hands to do the harvest.
No, and look, we've known about this since March, and in fact I made sure that our agricultural ministers from each state understood the severity of this and the problem we were going to get as we hit the hotter months. And effectively what we did back in March is the federal government said, let's extend the visas of those in the working holiday maker, the backpacker, the seasonal Pacific workers, if they work in agriculture. We identified agriculture as an essential service and said, if you work in agriculture, we'll give you an extra 12 months. Then in August, as we came to understand the virus better, and the Pacific nations, in fact, were COVID-free in many cases, we were able to reopen up and bring in new seasonal Pacific workers into the country. So since August, we've been saying to the states, you can bring them in. And in fact, the Northern Territory did. They brought some mango pickers in around September, but the other states effectively haven't done anything with respect to this. There's only been about 1,500. When we opened up in August, we had 22,000 pre-vetted, work-ready men and women from 10 Pacific nations ready to come to the country. But the states, from the start through National Cabinet, said that they wanted to own quarantine. Public health was their responsibility, which it is, and we respect that. That's what the Constitution says. That's what our forefathers put in place so many years ago. But we are now at a juncture where we are seeing farmers making decisions, commercial decisions about ploughing crops in and letting crops fall to the ground and basically rot because they do not have the bodies on the ground. And you've got to understand that each one of these jobs have to be market tested first. Australians get first crack at them, but no matter the incentive we've thrown at them, we haven't been able to get them to go and do the work.
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, you've got this scheme. You've got this scheme, 17.4 million the federal government put on the table, and that was for people who are on employment services schemes to say, well, all right, I'll relocate to the bush. For that, they get $6,000 for their trouble, and all they've got to do, I think, is work for 6 weeks and the money rolls in. Now, that was budgeted, the 17.4 million, for 3,000 people. To date, 355 or 12% of that total has been taken up. So the Australians just won't go and do the work.
No, and they haven't for years. We've got to be honest about it. I mean, we've got to try and incentivise Australians to take this work. And I appreciate that much of this work is some thousands of kilometres away from where some of the unemployed Australians live. But we're also saying to young Australians who might have left school, on top of reimbursing your travel costs, we're also accelerating your pathway into Aus study and AB study. So if you just left year 12 last year, you're not going to be able to backpack around the world. You could backpack around the country. You can go and earn $15,000. You'll have money in your pocket for O week to go to start university with, as well as get Aus study and AB study flowing in instead of having to wait the normal, which is around 14 months. Yeah. So we were trying to incentivise Australians, but we can't incentivise them any further. The Australian taxpayer has a limit to what we can put out there responsibly. And so what we're also saying is, well, we have to complement that, which we have for many years with overseas workers, which in history has been around 160,000 backpackers that are in the country from any one time, and about 30% of those work in agriculture, and then the seasonal and Pacific worker programs, which had 8,000 around when COVID hit, but we've tried to take that up to around 22,000 now to bring in and to cover that shortfall.
But see, this isn't just an Australian problem. If you go to Europe, a lot of the people that pick the fruit in Europe come from Africa. You go to Australia, a lot of people that pick the fruit come from Europe. I mean, it seems to be this strange game of, musical chairs and the music stops, we're all in someone else's continent. But why can't we, and this is the point, it's hard, but going forward, 80% of the agricultural workforce, or the pickers, the harvesters, are foreign. They're from overseas. They're itinerant. In a certain degree, I suppose, they're unreliable because they're not citizens. We've got to overcome this reliance long term, don't we, on having Europeans and Southeast Islanders and everybody else come and do the work that we should be doing ourselves.
You're right, and I think your analogy there is spot on. I think the music has stopped. That's been the problem. The music stopped, and we've all had to get back on our chairs. I think that's a fantastic analogy, and that's why I think we're going to have to look to the Pacific. And I know that we're looking to working up more longer-term solutions around a long-term Pacific and seasonal worker program solution, that we have these 22,000 pre-vetted work-ready men and women ready to come. They come for a period of time, and then they're only for 6 to 9 months every year, and they go home. They work and they take home some of their income, and then they're able to also help their family and some of their community. And there's some great stories. So it's a great piece of diplomacy that Australia's undertaken. I think it has legs, and I know Maurice Payne and I have been discussing how we could make this more of a permanent arrangement. We have to work through some of the technicalities of it, but we have to understand that we're not going to see the working holiday maker, the backpacker, back here for some time to come. And Australian farmers don't have the luxury to sit around and wait for someone to turn up to pick their fruit. When it's ready, it has to get from their paddock to your plate. And if it doesn't happen, it's not only you that pay the price at the checkout, they pay as well. They miss out on their income, and after years of drought, they're finally having a crack with a half-good season. And this has now come in and taken their legs out from under them, and we're just trying to work everything we can. We're imploring the states. The urgency of this was 3 months ago when we reopened up the Pacific and Seasonal Worker Program. We found these 22,000 people for you. But you have to do something about this. You want to own this. You want to be big boys and girls and have the responsibility and jurisdiction of this. We respect it, but do something about it. Please, just do something about it.
Well, as you know, and I know we've discussed this before, the problem with a lot of the states is it's, Fortress Queensland, Fortress WA, whatever, and that not just applies to, the disease zombies from Sydney, that applies to people from internationally as well, even when it comes to this essential task of picking the fruit.